We now come to the urgent question. Ben Lake.
Speaker, to ask the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs if you'll make a statement on the Government's response to Storm Darragh.
Firstly, I would like to say how sorry the Government was to hear that 2 people lost their lives during Storm Darragh, and I'd like to extend my sympathy to their family and friends. Late last week, the Met Office issued a red weather warning for wind covering for England and Wales, with wider parts of the UK covered by amber and yellow warnings. The Government immediately took action to prepare for the arrival of Storm Darragh. Ahead of the storm, we issued an emergency alert to over 3 million people in affected regions under a red weather warning, urging them to stay indoors. This was the largest use of the early warning system outside a test scenario. Impacts, although widespread, were managed effectively, and local response mechanisms worked to mitigate impacts. Of course, for the households and businesses affected by disruptions, this would have been a very distressing few days. Over 2.3 million customers have had their power restored since the storm made landfall, and as of this morning, just under 24,000 customers remain without power, and reconnections are continuing at pace. Operators expect to have all remaining customers reconnected by tomorrow. I'm very grateful for response from colleagues in devolved administrations and also local resilience forums around the country. And I'd also like to pay praise to our emergency responders and utility workers who have worked and indeed are continuing to work so hard in very difficult conditions in order to help the public manage the impacts of the storm.
Ben Lake.
This urgent question, and I'd also like to thank the Minister for her reply and indeed join her in expressing my condolences to the families of those 2 individuals who have sadly and tragically lost their lives. The storm left hundreds of thousands of homes without power and disrupted critical infrastructure, and we are all grateful to the engineers who are working tirelessly to restore power under very challenging conditions. And I should also like to pay tribute to the emergency services and local authorities who have also worked very hard to clear roads and to offer support to households where possible. However, I am deeply concerned, Mr Speaker, about the thousands of people still without electricity. This storm has brought into very sharp relief just how dependent other key utilities are on electricity, from heating to water supply to mobile phone networks. The latter concern is compounded in rural areas by the fact that many have lost their copper landlines in the recent digital switchover and now use a system that is dependent on mains power supply. Villages such as Blaenforce, Pontrhydd y Groes and Ponderwyd in my constituency, to name just a few, have not only been without power, therefore, but also periods without water, heat and any means of communicating for help and support. The increasing frequency of extreme weather events such as Storm Darragh due to climate change underscores the need for robust civil protection measures, encompassing both our immediate response but also long-term resilience planning. In this regard, Mr Speaker, our experiences with Storm Darragh highlight a need to review the adequacy of current arrangements. For example, if rural areas such as mine are without mobile signal and no longer have copper landlines, how are they to receive important emergency information, let alone call for assistance? Would the Minister therefore commit to reviewing arrangements in light of this storm, including whether the Priority Services Register is adequate to address the needs of vulnerable residents during widespread power outages, and ensure that key utilities are equipped to mitigate the impacts of future extreme weather events? And finally, will the Minister outline the Government's immediate actions to work with the Welsh Government and local authorities in Wales to support communities who are still without power, as well as its longer-term strategy to strengthen national resilience in the face of extreme weather events?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the honourable gentleman for his question and for his efforts over the weekend in providing advice and support to constituents. And I know that many households across North and Mid Wales have been particularly affected by the damage and disruption caused by Storm Darragh, as the honourable member has mentioned. So I again extend my sympathy to all those that have been affected by cuts, flooding and other disruption, which I know would have been very distressing. I also want to pay tribute again to the emergency services and utility workers in North and Mid Wales who are continuing to work hard to support the households affected. The UK Government has been working closely with their counterparts in Welsh Government. I know this is an issue that the Honourable Member has raised concerns about. And my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, spoke to the First Minister on Friday, and we are still continuing to work closely together. So I hope he feels reassurance on that aspect. In my first response, I did set out how work is underway to resolve the situation in relation to properties without power and properties affected by flooding, as the Honourable Gentleman has rightly pointed out. More broadly, we are continuing to work with partners to ensure that the disruption that has been caused is addressed as soon as possible, and that support is provided to those affected. And I hope the Honourable Gentleman feels reassured that we are constantly monitoring the work that we have done to see how we can improve it for future flooding situations like this and storm situations. So I hope the Honourable Gentleman feels reassured that the Government is taking this seriously, and I hope the whole House will support these efforts.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I echo the sentiments of my honourable friend, the honourable gentleman from Ceredigion, Preseli, in terms of people who lost their lives, but also all of those who've had their lives affected by flooding. Those of us who are in communities that have been flooded before know how desperately this impacts you, not just in the immediate aftermath, but for months and months afterwards. And one of the things that flood victims often say is that they have received false warnings on so many occasions that when the warnings come, they often don't have faith in them. Can the Minister tell us what the Government is doing to improve the reliability of these warnings so that we can actually be better informed, and also what we are doing to ensure the public are better educated about the limitations on these warnings that we get from the Environment Agency?
I'd like to thank the Honourable friend for raising this really important question, and also talking about the impact this does have on constituents like his, and I know from across the country. The Met Office warnings, they are based on judgments on highly trained staff who have carefully collaborated to provide instructive advice to people, businesses, transport operators and emergency responders on weather in its store and impacts on limit and customer disruption. In this particular situation, the emergency alert was approximately sent to 3 million people across Wales and South West on the 6th of Friday, and has reached people that needed to be reached really effectively.
We come to Shadow Minister, Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all applaud the Honourable Member for Ceredigion for this question. Can I just ask the Minister, the Honourable Member asked some very detailed questions about communication and connectivity that are vital for rural areas. Can she commit to writing to the Honourable Member and actually putting that in the House of Commons library as well? There's important information that needs to be put on the public record. Mr. Speaker, Storm Darragh has had and continues to have terrible impacts across the UK, and our thoughts are very much with the loved ones of those who tragically lost their lives in recent days, as well as the people whose homes and businesses have been devastated, and those who continue to feel the effects of the storm. We must not forget, Mr. Speaker, that for at-risk communities, the mental health consequences can remain long after the storms and floods have abated and the blue lights have left. We would like to pay tribute on this side of the House to the emergency services, the Environment Agency, local authorities and volunteer groups for their efforts to help people in challenging and dangerous circumstances. The Government needs to focus in the coming hours and days on ensuring that those without power are reconnected quickly, and help will be given to those who have been driven out of their homes, the repair and reopening of buildings and schools, as well as the process for insurance claims so that residents can return home as soon as possible. What conversations are being had across government to ensure that this all happens? What discussions did the Honourable Lady have with ministerial colleagues across government, the Environment Agency and the Met Office before this latest storm hit? The Government's Flood Resilience Task Force was set up to improve flood preparedness. The Flood Resilience Task Force has met once and its next meeting is next year. Should it not be stood up more frequently and meet more regularly? The last Conservative government, Mr Speaker, committed a record £5.2 billion from 2019 to 2027 to provide significantly improved flooding defences across the country. Will the new Labour government continue that investment? The Farm Recovery Fund, initiated by the previous Conservative government to support farmers, is vital. But is there new money there now for these recent storms like Bert and Darragh? And finally, Mr Speaker, can the government confirm there is an ongoing commitment to the communities hit by these increasingly common extreme weather events?
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his question. I would like to reassure the Honourable Member that the Government is working very closely with devolved administrations and organisations to address these issues. In fact, as I mentioned already, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster spoke to the First Minister on Friday, and we are still continuing to work together. As the Honourable Member has mentioned about the resilience review, work is being done in terms of strengthening that, and the emergency alerts have worked really effectively in terms of reaching those that are being directly affected. So I would like to say that in terms of the issues he's raised, particularly in terms of responding to the Honourable Member, we will be responding to make sure that his questions are answered.
Baros Curtis.
For the statement and express my sympathies to those affected, and my thanks to the emergency workers and utility workers for all the efforts they've put in over the weekend. In constituencies like mine in Cardiff West, this storm was of great significance, and I appreciate what the Minister has said in terms of the efforts and conversations between this government and the Welsh Government. I wonder if she can say any more about that and assure us that in the lessons to be learned from this about resilience and dealing with any future storms, that those lessons will be shared with all of us in this House as well as our colleagues in Wales.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his question. Like him, I recognise the impact this has had on individuals. In terms of the work we've been doing with the devolved administrations where his constituency is, we've been working very closely with the Welsh Government, particularly in looking at the civil contingencies response structures in response to Storm Darragh, and we have convened an all-Wales Civil Contingency Committee, and officials in the UK Government are regularly engaged with the Welsh Government in terms of this and making sure that local responders are working really effectively, and we will be looking to see what else we can learn from this situation.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Tim Farron.
Mr Speaker, and my thanks also to the Honourable Member for Ceredigion and Preseli, who asked an excellent question and raised this very important issue today. My thoughts also are with those who've lost their lives and the families of them who died tragically this weekend, and with all the communities who are so terribly affected by this. I have immense gratitude, as I'm sure we all have, for our emergency services, utility company staff, local communities who responded with such effectiveness and compassion. We were affected in Westmorland, not as badly as many people here, however, but it was just last week it was the 9th anniversary of Storm Desmond, and we remember and bear the scars with that as we stand in solidarity with all of those who are so deeply affected right now. The storm reminds us, Mr Speaker, of our duty to protect homes, communities, farmland and businesses. In the budget, the Government agreed to funding for flood defences up to March 2026, with the potential threat of reduced funding thereafter. So I wonder if the Minister would take this opportunity to guarantee as minimum the current level of funding for flood defences beyond March 2026. So much farmland, Mr Speaker, has been affected by this storm, yet farmers are key to successful flood management, storing water and slowing the flow, so to protect villages and towns downstream, such as Appleby and Kendal in my communities. So will the Minister now agree to look at increasing the Elms budget to help our farmers to be our first and best defence against flooding? And finally, would the Minister confirm that the Government will expand eligibility for the Farming Recovery Fund, and will the Government publish an up-to-date water management strategy to set out a plan for urgent maintenance and upgrades to flooding defences to protect homes, farmland and businesses at risk?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his question. The Government is working at pace to step up further preparations for the winter. we've invested £2.4 billion until March 2026 to improve flood resilience and better protect communities across the country. We are also looking at lessons from the floods, which are being directly fed into the Flood Resilient Task Force, which has been set under this new government. And that would be looking in terms of flood defences and bolstering the nation's resilience to extreme weather. I had the opportunity to attend the Flood Resilience Task Force with a wide range of stakeholders, and it was a positive way to address the future issues. With regards to farmers, we do recognise the significant impact that flooding does have on farmers and rural communities. That's why we are providing up to £50 million for internal drainage boards and an additional £60 million through the Farming Recovery Fund.
Catherine Fuchs.
And thank you to the Minister for coming to the House to explain what's been going on with Storm Darragh. I want to thank, like everyone, the emergency services and Monmouthshire County Council for all the work they did this weekend. Over 2 million households lost their power this weekend, including a group of constituents in Llangibby, one of which was extremely vulnerable. How many households have been reconnected? If the Minister could share that with us. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for raising her question. As she's mentioned, up to 2.3 million customers lost their power during the storm, and as of just this morning, as I mentioned, just under 24,000 customers are without power. We've been reassured as a government that the operators will be due to reconnecting all of them by tomorrow.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join the House in paying tribute to the emergency services, including Mid and West Wales Fire and Rescue Service, Dyfed-Powys Police and Powys County Council in my own constituency, who have been working tirelessly to keep people safe over the past few days. Communities across Wales, and in my own constituency of Brecon, Radnor and Cwmtawi, have been battered by this storm only a few weeks after already taking significant damage from Storm Bert. Many of my constituents in the Swansea Valley were left without power for over 48 hours, and some might not have power restored until Thursday. Likewise, many water supplies have been disrupted, and towns such as Bilth Wells have experienced significant flooding. Can the Minister tell me what support the UK Government is providing to Wales to ensure that power is restored as soon as possible to these households?
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his question and also like to say sympathy to those constituents of his that are still directly affected. Our priority is that we are still trying to make sure that everyone without power is being reconnected as quick as possible. And our colleagues in the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero have been receiving regular updates from the Energy Network Association with regards to electricity outwards, and work is being done swiftly to make sure those that are directly affected get their power as soon as possible.
Steve Witherden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I also thank the Honourable Member for Ceredigion and Preseli, my neighbour, for bringing this question. I'd like to add my voice to the chorus of voices thanking the emergency services, but I'd also like to pay tribute to communities and local businesses such as The Hand in Llanarmondugh and Ceiriog in my constituency, who it brought out the best in society. Sometimes the worst weather brings out the best in society. Would my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to local businesses and civic society for all their work in helping those most affected by the storm?
I'd like to thank the honourable friend for that question. Local businesses, local resilience forums, emergency services have played such a powerful role, and it's been very great to see communities and businesses come together to address these issues. So I would like to also share with him the thanks as well.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These storms are becoming more frequent. We have probably more experience in Scotland than most. Yet there's a prevailing sense that we lurch from one storm to the next. For example, with Storm Bert, there were concerns that the Met Office didn't issue enough warnings early enough. So can the Minister tell us to what extent she is bringing together the four nations to share their learning from these various storms so that we can respond in a better way.
Yeah.
Minister.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his question. So the Government has been working very closely with devolved administrations. As I've mentioned, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster held a call on Friday to see what work could be done collaboratively with the devolved administrations. A meeting was held to see which areas were directly affected in terms of where there were threats to lives, and an alert was issued particularly to those areas as quickly as possible. And we are working with operators because we do recognise there was some delay, particularly in terms of with the operators in terms of getting that information. So we are working with operators to see how, if there is another situation like this, they can get that message out as quickly as possible.
Julie Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister please give an update on the extent of the flooding problem that took place as a result of the storm? Because rural constituencies like mine in Shrewsbury, we had the double whammy. We were battered by the storm and then we were deluged once again by flooding. And that double problem is also much more sustained. Thank you.
Minister.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for her question. A lot of work has been done in this area, but if she writes to me, I'll be able to respond to that issue directly with adequate response.
It's Sybil Roberts.
And I thank my honourable friend, the member for Ceredigion, for securing this question. Electricity supplies have yet to be restored in some Gwynedd communities more than 72 hours after the red weather warning. Switching from copper to digital technology means that all landlines will need electricity to work in future, and so do mobile masts, and these are reserved Westminster matters, not devolved. Will she speak with her colleagues in DCMS and commit to a government assessment of the resilience of mobile and landline communication in Wales, and also the adequacy of the support given by BTEE to elderly and vulnerable people during the switchover process?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for her question. I would like to say firstly that engineers have been working with the National Grid's electricity distribution and other networks tirelessly to ensure that there are positive steps and support that are given to reconnect customers, and particularly vulnerable customers, as the Honourable Member has said. If she writes to me about the issues that she is talking about, we can certainly look into it in further detail.
Michelle Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister join me in paying tribute to our fantastic volunteers who worked in difficult circumstances around the clock, playing a critical role in protecting people and homes? And will she visit my constituency to meet with volunteers, including those from Loudon, Erith and Hucknall, who continue to face the threat of flooding?
Start.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for her question. I also like to say thank you to the volunteers that have worked really hard to provide support. With regards to her visit, I always try to do visits around the country. If she was to write to me, I'll see whether I'm able to do it and see if I can go with the flooding minister to do a visit to her constituency to see the hard work that volunteers have been doing in her constituency and across.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This morning there are still 2,500 people in North Shropshire without power. That is down from 8,000 yesterday morning, and I'm grateful to all the engineers who've worked so hard to get those people back online. But we also lost power to water booster pumps on Sunday, so a large area of North Shropshire experienced low water pressure. The town of Wem, which is sizable, had large areas with no water at all. And this was despite it only being a yellow weather warning. So it really does feel as if the resilience of the utility companies isn't where it needs to be to respond to an event of this nature. Can she reassure me what she's doing with the utility companies to make sure that we are more resilient in future, because these events are going to happen more and more frequently as the impact of climate change worsens?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for her question, and she's very right to raise that question. We are working very closely, our colleagues are working very closely in the Department for Energy, Security and Net Zero, and are, as I mentioned earlier, are receiving updates in terms of energy network associations. If any of her constituents are directly affected by this, I would like to urge them to call the network operator directly by dialing 105 or visiting the Power Cut 105 website. But she is right for us, right to say that we should be exploring how this could impact us in the future.
John Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Ironbridge Gorge, a World Heritage Site in my constituency, it's the days after the storm, as the river fills up from the water from Wales. Will the Minister commit to ensuring that areas like mine, which are secondary, get the attention of the Government? And will Government departments ensure that the economic hammer blow that flooding causes communities like mine will be considered in any future grants applications by the local authority?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the honourable friend for his question. We are currently doing a review of the flooding formula, which will address some of the issues that he has raised. Thank you.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am incredibly concerned that funding for organisations that coordinate multi-agency responses in events of emergency, such as the Sussex Resilience Forum, are looking to have their funding end in April next year. Will the Minister commit to long-term statutory funding for crucial organisations that plan emergency responses like the Sussex Resilience Forum?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for her question. There is already a long-standing relationship between the central government and local responders, and that is underpinned by the Civil Contingency Act. And also MHCLD already works with local resilience forums in preparing for during responses to emergencies and also providing a direct line of communication with central government. The Met Office is our statutory responder to the Civil Contingency Act, which strengthens its role at the heart of UK resilience communities. And I do recognise the role that resilience forums do contribute to the country and the role they've played, particularly during this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Northumberland has been battered by storms in the past, in recent years, most dramatically and most devastatingly Storm Arwen. So can the Minister assure me that she and her colleagues are taking proactive steps to protect communities in some of the most isolated places in my constituency from the devastating impact of those storms?
I'd like to thank the honourable member for his question. The government under DEFRA set up a flood resilience task force which is looking exactly into those issues that he has raised.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. Storm Darragh brought 96-mile-an-hour winds, flooding, power outages, and it came hot on the heels of Storm Bert, which brought severe rainfall and terrible flooding. Now, given the strong evidence that links increasing frequency and severity of storms to climate change, can I ask, what's the Minister's response to the comments of Emma Pinchbeck, the new Chief Executive of the Climate Change Committee, who said at the weekend that the UK is not ready for these increasingly severe impacts of climate change? What is the government doing? What will the government do to make adaptation an urgent national priority? Thank you.
Minister.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for this question. As she knows, we have just come into government. We have set up a flood resilience task force. We are also carrying out a resilience review. So we do recognise the issues that she has raised. And as a government, with a few months in, we are already proactively looking into this.
Becky Gettet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to associate myself with the regards of the Minister and so many across this House in commending our local authorities and our emergency services for the hard work that they did to make people safe. We know that the storm caused so much damage. Communities in my constituency, like Northup, without power for several days, and sadly I know many of us had plans to go out and support our local high streets on Small Business Saturday that are struggling. It feels like there's a palpable commitment in this chamber to preparedness, and with that I would like to ask the Minister what conversations were had with the Welsh Government prior to the storm to ensure that we were ready to tackle it.
Minister.
I'd like to thank the honourable friend for her question. The government is regularly meeting with officials in terms of looking at how we can work with devolved administrations. In terms of how we're looking at in terms of preparedness, As I mentioned, we're doing work on the resilience review. I've done a huge amount of engagement with various stakeholders and devolved administrations to make sure that no one's left behind in making sure that we are prepared in the future.
And David.
Firstly, let me thank the emergency services, Carmarthen County Council, the local authority and National Grid engineers for working so tirelessly to help residents without power in Caerfyrddin. And can I also give a little shout out to the farmers who actually helped clear the roads with their chainsaws as well. But with many areas locally on their 4th day without electricity and most not being promised a connection until Thursday, some also without water and connectivity, it's clear we need additional help. The 105 line is not working, it's overwhelmed. It's not its fault, it's just overwhelmed with the number of calls that are being received. What advice does the Minister have in rural communities such as Trelech and Brechfa, Blaenwain and Llanarthne, who are in desperate need for generators within their local community halls, their village halls and community centres, where they locally can provide hot water, hot meals and a place actually to charge their mobile phones? Can we do something about this, Minister?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for her question and also also show sympathy to what her constituents are going to. I'm disappointed to hear that there are issues with the networks in terms of constituents reaching those networks. We are trying our best to work with those networks to see how we can particularly consider the wider lessons in the future. If she writes to me directly about these specific matters, we can certainly explore this further.
Victoria College.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Harpenden and Berkhamsted, much of the impact of Storm Darragh is wholly preventable, such as the Flamstead village being cut off with Trowley Bottom and Checkers Lane being flooded, Station Road in Harpenden, Putnam, and next to our Hospice of St Francis is Shooters Way, which is repeatedly flooded, and they're worried about ambulance access. So I'd ask the Minister, what are the government doing to work with local authorities with a long-term strategy to prevent a lot of this repeated damage from storms like that as Storm Darragh?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for her question. We're doing work with local resilience forums. We're also carrying out a flood review. And as I mentioned, that there is a flood task force that has been set up, which is exploring those issues that she has raised. Thank you.
Steph Aquarel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the damage from Storm Darragh was thankfully limited in North Norfolk, we did see a number of properties suffering power cuts in my constituency, which lasted well into Monday. These have highlighted once again the problem caused by mobile phone signal in rural parts of North Norfolk, as others have spoken of too. Many people didn't receive updates and can't access real-time SMS information. Can the Minister tell me what discussions she has had with colleagues in DSIT about ensuring we fix these not spots and keep my constituents safe and connected when the next big storm hits?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member who promoted me there just for a moment. DSET is looking into this and seeing how those issues that he has raised can be looked into it, and I do recognise that there were issues particularly with networks and access to mobile networks, which was a real challenge in terms of reaching people, particularly vulnerable individuals. So this is something that is currently being reviewed by my colleagues in DSET.
Thamesmead.
Diolch, Cyfarwydd. Storm damage in Holyhead has led to severe disruption to the second busiest road off port in the UK, with the ferries being cancelled to Ireland. This weekend also saw the closure of the Britannia Bridge to all vehicles. The vulnerability of the island's connection to the mainland has been of concern for several years, with access to our main hospital at risk. What assurance can the Minister give me that island communities like my constituency of Ynys Môn are safeguarded in the future with extreme weather?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for her question. This is something that I've been particularly concerned about, particularly when looking at the work of resilience, in terms of who may be affected with issues like this, particularly vulnerable people and people that may not be, may become vulnerable as a result of something like this. It's part of the work that we're doing into the review, and I know that local resilience forums have also been looking into this. For us, we are working closely with Welsh local authorities and the government to see how these issues could be addressed.
Chloe Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Storm Darragh is the second serious storm to hit my Thornbury and Yate constituency in recent weeks, coming so soon after Storm Bert, which caused serious flooding disruption, and I'd like to thank everyone involved in the response. These storms are not going away, and due to the impacts of climate change, they're only likely to get worse. We need a clear framework of support for local authorities to ensure that they know when they will get the support and what the support will be. So can the Minister please provide some clarity on this?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for her question. We are working very closely with devolved administrations and also local resilience authorities and emergency responders on a regular basis to see how we could address this. Next year in April, the UK Resilience Academy will be launched, and that would be a great way of us looking at lessons and how we can strengthen our responses to issues like this.
Just Brownfellow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My residents in Bursted, Pagham and across my constituency of Chichester live in constant fear of storms like Darragh that cause severe localised flooding, which often isolates communities and also closes businesses, often for months on end. There is funding available for local communities to improve their flood resilience, but this year West Sussex County Council cut that pot of funding by a third when the problem in my patch is only getting worse. How does the Minister expect communities to be resilient to flooding if local councils are eroding that funding?
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for her question. Specifically in terms of what West Sussex County Council has done, we don't have authority in terms of how they do that. But we have been advising councils who are under a lot of pressure at the moment to see how they could be looking at resilience in terms of issues like this. And this is an issue that I think is really important, that hasn't always been championed, and hopefully it's a conversation that we can all spread and encourage people to play a role in that.
Joshua Lennox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hurley and Cookham in my constituency have been hit time and time again as a result of storms. So will the Minister confirm what work the Government is doing to protect villages along the Thames that often get flooded several days after the storm has passed?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his question. As I mentioned, we've set up a flood resilience task force, which also looks at constituencies like his to make sure that they're not impacted. As a government, we have also invested 22.4 billion until March 2026 to improve flood resilience and better protect communities in the country. And also DCIT is also looking at particularly UK power networks to see what role they could play, and also the red alerts the emergency alerts that were issued on Friday. We are looking at lessons learnt to see how, if we roll this out in the future, how it could be effectively used.
Now come to Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for her positivity and helpful answers, and it's very clear that the Minister is doing her best to try and make things better. Also, put on record thanks to all of the emergency workers and service across this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland for their sterling efforts. Storm Darragh, Minister, saw the cancellation and delay of numerous trains and flights across Northern Ireland and further afield across the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Whilst these circumstances cannot be helped, there will be thousands, indeed probably more than thousands of people who have been at a financial loss due to the cancellations and delays. What steps will the Minister take to ensure that air and rail companies across the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland do their bit to ensure due compensation is paid to constituents and that they are not at a loss due to the weather conditions? Thank you.
Minister.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for his question. This is something that we need to look at how we can work collaboratively, particularly in terms of how his constituency is impacted, but also seeing what the challenges are in terms of why these matters aren't being addressed, particularly at a local level.
That completes the urgent question.